Hey, this is Brian Ahearn. And if you really want to learn how to level up your life, you should be listening to the Time to Shine Today podcast, hosted by my good friend, Scott Ferguson. Let's level up.
Time to Shine Today podcast Varsity Squad. This is Scott Ferguson. We're at episode 319. And we're dropping this episode while my good friend Brian Ahearn is enjoying himself out in Wyoming. I'm super jelly that he's out there enjoying himself, his family, and just making great memories. But this podcast really resonated with me very, very closely. He's all about influence and ethical influence and helping you build relationships, have meaningful conversations with people, whether you're in the sales business or you're working your way up the corporate ladder or even in your personal life. And Brian is an author, a speaker, a coach, and he's just an overall kick-ass human being, man. I just love Brian, and we had such a fun conversation. I have pages upon pages of notes. So I do strongly recommend you get your digital note taker or just a pen and pad and paper, sit back and relax and just let these knowledge nuggets go into internalization with you. So without further ado, here's my really good friend, Brian Ahearn from Influence People. Let's level up. Time to Shine Today podcast Varsity Squad. This is Scott Ferguson, and I've been wanting to get this gentleman on my show for quite a while. His name is Brian Ahearn. He's fantastic author. If you're watching, I'm holding up a book that I am going to do a giveaway to 5 lucky listeners where I'm going to purchase the book. I was blessed enough for him to send me some copies, but I'm going to purchase more for 5 lucky listeners at the end. And the book is The Influencer, or else maybe even go to his Amazon book page and you pick it out. And I'll make sure that I have it, get them signed by Brian and then mailed out to you on time to shine today's dime. But Brian Ahearn is a dynamic international keynote speaker. If you don't believe me, go to his YouTube or check out anything. Just Google him. He's fantastic on stage. He's an author, coach, and consultant. He specializes in applying the science of influence in everyday situations. Brian is the only one of a dozen in the world certified to teach ethical influence on behalf of Dr. Robert Cialdini, the most cited living psychologist on the subject. And again, I read his book, and I'm going to I have books out there that I do 5-year reads, and it's something like books like The Go-Giver by Bob Berg, which that's who I thought about. My neighbor here, Bob Berg, if you're listening out there, brother. It just was right in that round with Bob Berg, Mitch Albom, Andy Andrews. It's just fantastic. It's such a fun read. I actually felt myself in the character as well. And Brian, thank you so much for coming on. Please introduce yourself to Time to Shine Today podcast Varsity Squad. But first, what's your favorite color and why?
Favorite color is blue. And when I was a kid, I lived in the Los Angeles area and the Rams were out there. They were my favorite team. So I think that's why it stuck.
Wow, and they just went full circle right back to LA a couple of years ago, right, or last year. So what?
Yeah, they've been around.
You're in around the great city of Columbus, which I absolutely love, Columbus, Ohio. And I love it when Ohio State beats Michigan because I'm a Sparty fan, a Michigan State fan. But are you still a Rams fan, or are you migrated to Cincinnati Bengals, or what's your story?
Probably mostly a Steelers fan because my wife is from Pittsburgh, and when she moved to Ohio, she began cheering for the Buckeyes. I cheer for the Steelers, and when you're both cheering for the same teams on Saturday and Sunday, there tends to be a little more peace and happiness in the household.
I absolutely love that. And it's crazy. I live in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, and there is a bar here called the Snuggery. And every Sunday, you're not getting in this bar unless you have a Steelers jersey on. And I'm not even kidding, man. I'm going to take a picture of it one of these Sundays when the season and send it to you because you're like, what? It's crazy. Huge Steelers. There's a huge Steelers following here in this area of Florida as well. So you guys will be right at home when you guys come down. I love it. Get it on the flight this winter. Yeah, absolutely. So Brian, let's get to a little bit of because when I'm reading the book, The Influencer, it was like, man, he's had to have walked in a lot of these steps in whatnot, and you were mentored by people as well. You put that in the acknowledgments at the end, which was fantastic. Thank you for doing that for those. But Can you get us to a little bit of the base, maybe the origins of where you started and how you're leveled up to be one of only a dozen of Dr. Cialdini's students, if you will, to teach?
Sure. Well, I started my insurance career with Travelers Insurance right out of college, knew nothing about insurance, but it sounded like a good job. And it was in Columbus, where I was from. Took the job, really found out it's a great industry because if they do their job well, you really end up helping people. But I started morphing into the sales area, and I came across Robert Cialdini's work on influence. And I realized right away, it's the underpinning of all selling. The psychology that he talks about explains why certain approaches work and why certain ones don't. And I was so intrigued by it, I began to utilize it in everything that I was doing at work. And by fate, ended up meeting Dr. Cialdini. And then back in 2008, went through his certification process to begin to teach his methodology. And I knew at that point, Scott, that I was going to, whenever I was going to leave the insurance industry, it's what I would do with the rest of my life. And 3.5 years ago, I left, and now I spend all my time teaching people, coaching, consulting around the psychology of persuasion, or the science of influence, it's also known as.
I love it. And so what makes his teachings, the science of influence and whatnot, different than maybe others, maybe help them stand out or level up from there?
Well, when you talk about psychology, it's a huge field. And so he narrowed it down specifically to influence. And what is it that causes one person to say yes to another? So his approach differed in that he realized if he really wanted to understand this, he needed to get out of the confines of just the university and some of the experimentation they did there. So he took a 3-year hiatus and he went out into the real world and got selling cars, electronics, making calls to sell family portraits, because he wanted to first learn from the training programs, and second, from the people who really excelled. And after the 3-year period, he stepped back and he looked at everything that he had learned, combined it with his academic background, and said, you know what? There are basically 6, and he coined the term, principles of persuasion that make it easier for people to say yes. And so that was the framework that really set him apart from other people. And I think he wrote about it in a way that people could go, oh, I get it. I understand this. And so over the last 30 plus years, he's become the most well-known in the field of influence and persuasion.
What are the 6 principles, if you're allowed to share those?
Sure. There's principle of liking. It's easier for us to say yes to those we know and like. Reciprocity. We feel a natural obligation to give back to people who first give to us. Consensus, or social proof. We are heavily inclined to follow the lead of many other people. We've got a herd instinct.
Yes.
Authority, which says we will naturally defer to people with superior wisdom or expertise when we're making decisions.
Wow.
And then the final 2 that he talks about, consistency, is about that internal need to be consistent in what we say and what we do. And the final one was scarcity. We value things more when we think they're rare or going away.
Wow. And those are so, it's beautiful. And in the book, The Influencer, you really covered it. And what I loved about it, Brian, is that you covered it without being educational. You did it in the conversation. There's an art form to that. And thank you for doing that, man. That's awesome.
Oh,
I'm going back and, what I do is when I read a book, I highlight and then I go back and type out what I highlight. And it took me an hour and 10 minutes, and I'm a fast typer, to type out the knowledge nuggets you threw in there for John. Right. So yeah, his name was John, right? In the character.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yep. Okay. And that was fantastic. So right now with your leadership, in influencer training, are you working with people, Brian, one-on-one, or are you doing more in groups, or what's your format for that?
So I do a variety of things. Usually I go out, I speak at conferences. They go, hey, we like what you said. And then I may go in and do workshops for anywhere from 12 to 24 people.
Awesome.
I do one-on-one coaching with individuals, and then I also consult. So it depends on what the needs of the organization are. But I will tell you, Scott, I stay in my lane. For example, I had a potential client who said, well, we're really looking for someone to help us build a sales process. And I said, that's not my expertise. I know people, I'll make referrals, but once you get your process, I can help you maximize it by incorporating the psychology. So I try to stay very tight in that lane, but anything that revolves around it, I'm your man.
I love that you do that. And because again, the smartest person in the room really is someone that can refer out what they don't know, right? And they can grow from there. And thank you for doing that. So when you start to work with a company, is there any, or individual for that matter, is there any good secret sauce that you might not mind sharing that maybe helps them find their blind spots?
Probably the best secret sauce comes back to that principle of liking. Everybody understands that it's easier for someone to say yes if they like you, right? If you like me, Scott, easier for you to say yes to me. And it's not very hard to get people to like you once you understand how that works. But what most people do wrong is they spend all of their time trying to get that person almost desperately to like them. The real key is that I would put all of my efforts into coming to know and like you. Because when you begin to sense, Scott, that, hey, Brian really likes me, he's genuine, he cares for me, he's doing things that are beneficial for me, that's what opens you up to whatever I might ask. And everything gets easier from that point going forward. So everybody gets it, but they do it just a little bit wrong.
Wow. And that's fantastic. Something that I was taught is, I'm that person, I'm that guy now. I'm 50 years old. So it's kind of, it's been for maybe the last 4 or 5 years where I really am genuinely more interested in hearing your story than telling you mine. Right. And once I started doing that, Brian, I make friends or contacts, acquaintances, connections like they never, and if I would have learned that when I was in my 20s, right, I would be, and I do well, but I'd be so much further ahead, right? And I love that you're putting that out there to them. So when you're working with the individual, or maybe you're still in the discovery period a little bit, Brian, with a company, is there any good question you wish they would ask you but never do?
I'm so thorough, I think, when I'm covering things that a lot of times when I pause and I go, okay, so what questions do you have? I think there's so much going on in their minds with the psychology
Right.
and the application
Right.
that it takes them a while to process through that. Even when I'm speaking to a large audience, it can be difficult because you can just see they're thinking really hard.
Right.
But one thing I would point out that I wish that we had more conversation, that principle of consistency, people get that backwards because they start thinking about themselves and their own consistency. And it's super important that you do what you say. But when you're trying to influence another person, it's about them. What have they said? What have they done? What do they value? The more I come to know that, the easier it is for me to align whatever it is that I'm asking of them. And when it's right in line with what they think, believe, and value, that's what makes it easier for them to say yes.
Wow. And how do you get there? Like, what do you have any, like me with my coaching clients? I learned again of this years ago with my real estate businesses. I use the FORD acronym, right? Family, occupation, recreation, dreams. If I can know those 4 things, I can really build the rapport and consistency. I ask very powerful questions around that acronym. So what are you a big believer really in powerful questions to really build
Absolutely.
that cohesive? Okay, good.
Because in working with salespeople primarily, good salespeople only talk 25, maybe 30% of the time. Now, I know that probably many of your listeners have had the exact opposite, and that's what's a turnoff, is the person who won't stop talking. But a good salesperson knows their product or service. They know what questions to ask, and they allow the prospect to do all the talking. They listen well, they ask other questions. And so the other person feels in control of the conversation, and yet they're getting the information that they need. When it comes to being able to do that well, again, I'll go back to the principle of liking. It starts with that, because one of the things that we talk about is connecting on what we have in common. And when we do that, everything else gets easier. The conversation flows naturally. That's where you start learning the things that they value and that they believe. And then you come in and you tap into the principle of consistency by asking the questions, because most people don't want to say one thing and do another. Make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so good. That is so good. So with your experience that you have, what do you believe that your strengths are?
I used to, a lot of people have told me that I'm really good at networking and connecting. And I used to not be, because my thought process on that was work in the room, getting a drink and, hey, who are you? And I hate that. I would much rather find one or two people that I connect with and have a really deep conversation.
Yes.
But what I've learned online is if I have good systems in place, then I can do the connecting in something that's very natural for me. So as an example, if I go to a conference and I can get a hold of a list, I will go through every person and send a personal invite on LinkedIn. And I will then send a personal response back to them. That starts generating some conversation. It opens up opportunities as I travel to meet these people. So that for me has become a real strength, but not in the way that most people think of networking.
Love it. And can I ask you to spill a little bit about what you might say in that initial introduction email, or I'm sorry, LinkedIn message?
Yeah. So if I had, let's say I spoke at a conference, an insurance conference, and you were an attendee, and I might say, Scott, I hope you enjoyed the presentation I gave on influence at the such and such conference. Would love to stay connected with you here if you're open to that. Thanks, Brian. Then I just send that. Now, what I do though, Scott, is that message, other than the name, I can just paste that in each time.
Right.
And so I just find the people, paste it in, but it's still personal. And and that gets a lot of response.
And it's not, lack of a better term, douchebaggy, because a lot of times you'll get those messages of like, this is what I can do for you. How do you freaking know what you can do for me?
Yeah.
Right. And there's no
selling in those messages.
Thank you. I knew you were going to say that, Brian, like his message, because it sounds very, very similar to mine. I love that you said that. So how about, let's go with the weaknesses. What weaknesses do you think that you may have that you work on consistently to level up?
Well, the weakness used to be the networking, and now it's not because of that time.
Yeah.
In terms of what I need to do better, I think I'm very focused, but I can always be, I think, a little bit more focused. For example, today's a nice day. I'm going to go outside and relax. I know that you need to take some time to do that, but I need to stay in routine, I guess. If I'm not in my routine, then I can wander a little bit and not feel productive. But when I'm home and I'm getting up at the same time and I'm doing this, man, I crank it out. So, being able to stay focused on that is what will help me avoid weakness.
I love it. And you and I, like we said it earlier, we're like brothers from different mothers, man, because we have so many things in common. We've, bodybuilding, fitness, stretching, everything that we've talked about. It's awesome. So I love that you're saying that. So, Brian, have you seen the movie Back to the Future?
I have. It was a long time ago, but
it was. It's almost 40 years old. It's crazy, right? But let's get in that DeLorean with Marty McFly. Let's go back to the Double Deuce, the 22-year-old Brian. What kind of knowledge nuggets, as we call him here at Time to Shine today, what kind of knowledge nuggets would you drop on him? Not so much to change anything, because June is your wife, I believe, right? June? Or Jane. Sorry, Jane. Like, you met all that. You just gave your daughter away at an awesome wedding last month. I mean, you live a good life, but what kind of knowledge would you maybe drop on the 22-year-old Brian to maybe help him level up, or maybe shorten his learning curve just a little bit?
I think I would have been more of a learner early on. When I first got out of college, last thing I wanted to do was read any books. It wasn't until I was in my mid-30s that I really dove in deep in learning. And I think I could have gotten a lot more out of that, 10 to 12 year period if I would have stayed in rhythm and continued to read books and learn. And who knows, how that might have expanded opportunities that are here today. So that would be the advice.
Love it, man. Would you have listened?
He might have. It would depend. I think about some things, and I was a pretty good listener. Like my dad served in the Marines, and he told me when I went to college, treat it like a business, do your work until 5 o'clock, then you can go have as much fun as you want. And as I've reflected on my life with my father, because he passed away about 1.5 years ago, I did listen. I did take a lot of what he said. So I probably would have listened to that, but I didn't have a mentor when I was 22. People weren't talking about that so much back in the, mid 80s.
Yeah, exactly. Exact same path. I would have been like, slow your roll a little bit, get your ass in gear, ask for the help where you need, and continue to educate yourself and level up. That's beautiful. So how do you want your dash remembered, Ryan? That little line in between your incarnation date and your expiration date, your life date and a death date. Hopefully it's a gazillion years down the road, but how do you want that dash remembered for yourself?
That I was someone who helped people. I wrote a personal mission statement, and at the top it says that when I die, I want to hear God say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And I really believe, Scott, that with what I do through influence, I have an opportunity to help people enjoy more success at the office and happiness at home. And if when I pass away, people can say, because I knew Brian, I was so much more of a success, or better relationships with my spouse or my kids, then I think God will be saying, "Hey, well done."
Wow, that's amazing. That's something that I want to be remembered as well. Is, I believe that the more you mentor, the more immortal you become, right? It's like you just, because what you spill to people, they're spilling to other people in the future. And I love that you take that giving, that go-giver, if you will, from Bob, right? That attitude. So then what do you think people might misunderstand the most about Brian?
Initially, when they meet me, what they misunderstand is that I actually have a great sense of humor. And I say that because I know I have a serious look, to the point where my wife a few years ago for my birthday bought me smiling lessons. She hired a guy to teach me how to smile, because she's like, "You don't smile enough." But what makes my humor funny is because I do come across serious. And then when I kind of cut the grain with something, that's what makes people laugh. And then when they start going like, "Wow, he actually is funny. He's got this great sense of humor." And then it's like game on. And then, so that would be the thing, I think, that people would misunderstand, just because my look, that I'm more serious than I actually am.
Love it. I love it. So I'm the same way. I had to get somebody that they said, Fergie, you look like you just drank vinegar or something, because I would have this hard look, and I'm like, man, that's not me. I'm from the Midwest. I like to give hugs, and when I meet people, but the initial, I'm 6'1", I'm 260. I'm not that little of a dude. So when I walk in, people, and I have that pissy look, they can come like, "Oh, he's a bully," in a sense, right? And I'm like, I'm the first person to give you a hug and love on you, man. How about, is there anything, if anything, that keeps you up at night?
Early on, when I started this business, a lot of things would wake me up in the middle of the night. I would just have a thought about, "Oh, what about this? How am I going to do that?" And I couldn't go back to sleep. And so I would start getting up and working at ungodly hours.
Right.
As I got into a rhythm, though, I feel like entrepreneurship in some respects is like a snowball going downhill. If you put in all the work up front, and you keep doing the things and nurturing, all of a sudden stuff starts coming back, and you keep feeding the pipeline. So the pipeline is bigger, but things are coming back, gets easier for the opportunities, and you're not stressing about things as much, and you're relaxing more. So I've kind of slid down with the snowball going downhill. My sleep is a lot better now.
Isn't it? It's like when my coach had to tell me, it's like, "Fergie, there's absolutely nothing you can do about this at like 1 a.m. So just let it go. It'll still be there." And he also told me that when I die and I pass away, my inbox is not going to be empty. There's always going to be something there. And I love it. That just goes back to, time management and your protocol during the day. like you said, getting up and getting it done. So if you take out of this question, this equation, anything electronic, and that includes phones, tablets, computers, whatnot, what are 3 things that Brian can't live without?
Oh, but without
No
excluding all the
electronics.
technology.
Yeah, no
What
technology.
are 3 things I can't live without? Scotch. I love scotch.
Right.
I will lump them together, my wife and daughter, because I love them with all my heart. They're the 2 things that when I talk about, I smile and I cry and
That's awesome.
everything. So those would be and then probably the gym in my basement, because I've had it for about 30 years and I use it 5-6 days a week. So those would be the 3 things: stress,
Beautiful.
my family, and scotch, my family, and the gym in the basement.
Stress. We use the scotch for the stress.
Yeah.
I love it. So, Brian, what is your definition of a life well lived?
Happy is the man who wants what he has. I think that when you can look around, in fact, we were sitting on our patio last night enjoying some cigars, and my wife looked around and she goes, "We are so blessed. Our home is not extravagant, but it's ours, and we've lived here for a long time, and everything that we have, we appreciate." And I think when you can look around, and it doesn't mean that you don't aspire for other things, but you know that if you don't get those things, you're still happy. And so happy is the man who wants what he has.
That's awesome. It's funny. Susan and I were just driving a couple of days ago, and just looking around, and here in South Florida, we live in Palm Beach Gardens, Jupiter, Florida, and it's just, we're like, wow, we're blessed. This is just amazing. Everything that's going on. I love that. Happy is the man who wants what he has. That's beautiful. Time to Shine Today podcast, Varsity Squad. We are back, and Brian, one day we're going to meet up in Columbus or even down here, and we can have a chat about some of these questions and maybe go 15-20 minutes on them. But you got 5 seconds with no explanations on our leveling up lightning round. You ready to level up, brother?
All right, let's go for it.
Let's do this. Brian, what is the best leveling up advice you've ever received?
Luck is where preparation meets opportunity.
Yes, sir. Share one of your personal habits that contributes to your success.
Daily fitness.
Beautiful. So other than, if you see me walking down the street, man, Fergie looks like he's in his doldrums a little bit, just, putting off a bad vibe. Other than the influencer, what book might you hand me?
Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Thank you. You just imagine. Oh my gosh. So Brian, what's your most commonly used emoji when you text?
Probably the surprise, the one with the big eyes, because I say a lot of things that surprise people.
Love it. Nicknames growing up?
Breenie.
Breenie?
Breenie.
Love it. So, and don't lie to me on this one, my brother, but if you could stay one age physically for the rest of your life, keep the knowledge you've gained and continue to garner wisdom. If you could stay one age physically for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Probably 47.
Very good. Chess, checkers, or Monopoly?
Monopoly.
All right. Ice cream, go-to ice cream flavor.
Mint chocolate chip.
Right. We're definitely hanging out. So there's a sandwich called the Breenie. What's on that sandwich? Build it for me.
Lettuce, tomato, onions, green peppers, jalapenos, maybe some asparagus. It's going to be entirely vegetarian.
Very good. Favorite charity and organization you'd like to give your time or money to?
It's called POJ, Person of Jesus, and I support somebody whose ministry is that.
That's awesome. Thank you for saying that. Last question, Brian. You can elaborate on this one a little bit, but what is the best decade of music? 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s?
For me, it would be 80s because it's tied to so many emotions. I mean, I was in high school, learned to drive, met my wife, got married, first job out of college. I mean, everything for me happened with the exception of the birth of our daughter in the 80s. So all that emotion and tied to those songs.
It's so funny, and this is so off track, but my friends said, Fergie, you have to watch Stranger Things. And these friends of mine, it's on Netflix, right? These friends of mine are in their 50s. And I'm like, it's a kid's show. He's like, but it takes place in 1984 and the kids are 12. And I'm like, I was 12 in 84. So it was like watching this show takes me back, and they were so explicit on stuff. And I'm like, man, I do miss the 80s, bro. It's like, I do miss that time with the music. And you had the invasion of, Irish from U2, Duran, Men at Work, but you also had the Big Hair, Don't Care rap with like Beastie Boys or Run DMC. And you still had some classical music in there too. So it was the best. And I graduated in 1990. So my whole childhood really was the 80s. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
Love that. So Brian, how can we find you, my friend?
Well, LinkedIn. And I promise anybody who reaches out, if you don't put how you found me, I will ask you. You'll get some personal connection with me. And then my website, influencepeople.biz.
Influencepeople.biz. I love that. And Brian, do me one last solid, please, and leave us with one last knowledge nugget we can take with us, internalize, and take action on.
Do everything you can to like the people that you meet, work with, or that are around. You will be amazed at how that changes your relationship status.
That's awesome. And squad, like, again, we are brothers from different mothers, me and Brian. Is so much that I've learned from him just through his readings. And you just got really a free masterclass from Brian. He reminds us that influence is the underpinning of all selling. It's kind of what causes each person to say yes to another. And he brings it back to the 6 principles of persuasion, that it makes it easier for that person to say yes, or even in you to say yes as well to certain things, but that's liking, reciprocity, consensus, authority, consistency, and scarcity. And go back to probably around the 10-minute mark or 7-minute mark. And Brian he really explains those, not in detail, because I want you to get with Brian. If you make a warm introduction to Brian, if you're looking to level up your skills, a good coach really maintains his lane. He doesn't go outside of what he's good at. He maximizes his skills. Like a punter in football is not going to start on the defensive line. They have skills, they stick to it, and they farm out the other parts. What he does with companies or individuals, they come to him to help him find the blind spot, is he really ramps up the principle of liking. He likes to try to get to know them, and he puts all efforts into liking you. And he's more interested really in your story than he is in telling you about his. He says that, 30%, good salespeople only talk 30% of the time. They really want to get to know the person that they're selling to, because they want to build that relationship, that rapport, and if you can connect on things that you have in common, everything gets easier. The conversation flow does. And then you can really build a relationship, or maybe even a friendship. He would tell his younger self, and he would tell himself even now, to consistently be a learner and educate yourself and get your asking gear, like my good friend Leah Woodford would say, if you don't know something. And he's such a mentor through his writings, and also to the people that he comes across in life. And again, I said it before, but the more you mentor, the more immortal you become. He's a true helper. He's planting trees that he's never going to sit in the shade of. And when he's done, he wants God to tell him that he's well done, that he's lived a loving and faithful life. And he reminds us, I love this quote, is happy is the man who wants what he has. It's okay to want more and to go after it, but be really at peace and grateful for what you have now. And lastly, do everything that you can to like everyone that you are around. Doesn't mean you have to be best friends, but why sit there in silence when you can have a fun conversation and get to know someone? And that's what my good friend Brian does. That he levels up his health, he levels up his wealth. He's earned his varsity squad letter here at Time to Shine today. He's humble yet hungry, and I can't wait to collaborate with him in the future. Brian, thank you so much for coming on, brother.
It was my pleasure, Scott. Thank you for having me.
You bet. We'll chat soon. Bye now.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to this episode of Time to Shine Today podcast. Proudly brought to you by Sutter & Nugent Real Estate Excellence, who can be reached at 561-249-7266 and online at www.sutterandnugent.com. If you are a business owner or professional who would like to be interviewed on Time to Shine Today, please visit timetoshinetoday.com/guest. If you like this episode, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. There's a link in the show notes to our website. Also there, you will see our recommended resources. We hope that you will support our show by supporting them. If you like what you've been listening to, it'd be great if you could just give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe while you're at it. I'm your host, Scott Ferguson, and until next time, let's level up. It's our time to shine.